Welcome to The Innovators by Scandinavian Man, a podcast about our changing world with the people who influence it. On this show, we cover some of the best and brightest minds within design, culture, fashion, technology, and sustainability. Mostly, but not always, from a Scandinavian perspective. I'm Conrad Olsson, and my guest today is Emma Olbers. Emma is an award-winning designer and creative director based in Stockholm. Last year, she was awarded Designer of the Year by Room Magazine and Sustainability Profile of the Year by Residence Magazine. Her work towards a more sustainable furniture production has caused ripples throughout the global design industry. Emma, welcome to the show.
Thanks. That sounded good.
How do you feel about that? You just mentioned to me before we started here that you are not actually launching a new product this year, but you are doing a lot of talks.
Yes.
On this subject.
Yeah, that's true.
And obviously that's why I want to have you on the show as well. Not just because you're an excellent designer and I've followed you throughout your career, but I think where we are at right now in the industry and in the world, the topic of sustainability is unavoidable in my view. So let's start with some of the basics then. So why is design important when it comes to sustainability?
For me, design is a lot of problem solving. And then I guess, why it's important. I think it could be that we could help solving the problem, maybe. Be a little part of that. Like the industry stands for 32% of the total global emissions. So maybe we could help there. I think.
Whole furniture industry?
No, the industry, not the furniture industry.
That would be a lot.
No, the industry sector.
So how, as a designer, how do you tackle this problem? How do you start?
I think listen to the science is the most important and learn the facts. Try to read or listen as much as you can. And after a while then you understand that material is the core issue. So work a lot with the materials, how much you use and the way you use it and what type. You
mentioned to me before that I think material stands for about 50% of the footprint.
Total emission of furnitures.
Right.
It depends a little about how you count it, but in general.
So and the rest is transportation.
Transportation is actually more like 4% of the total.
Oh wow!
So the rest is production, of course, like 20%, and then recycling, administration, and so on. Right.
So let's start with materials then, because I think in any industry, whether you're talking about fashion or design or furniture, I think it's all about the materials and how much we use it. So which materials are good to use?
It depends on what you are looking for, but if you say that sustainability is lower the temperature, then CO2 emission is the most important. And then is it materials with low carbon emission.
Right.
And the ones with lowest carbon emissions are like fast-growing fibers and grass, like bamboo and seagrass and so on. And the worst is that I use is leather. But then concrete is a very bad one too, but I don't use that so much. It's more like buildings.
That to me is almost like counterintuitive in a way. I think when you look at sort of natural furniture and you sort of there's almost like an aesthetic that has grown around this, and then you're thinking about leather and wool and perhaps even concrete is sort of tactile. It feels natural, but those are actually worse for the environment.
Worst for the CO2 emission. I think you can see other things where if you talk about wool. They have high emission because it's from animals like beef. it's the same with what you eat. But wool is actually in Sweden a rest product. Usually they cut the wool and then they just throw it away. So if you see it as a rest product, it's much better and lower in carbon. But it's always how, if you count just strictly the carbon emission. And then of course it's how, when you say 50%, it's on the life cycle. So of course it depends on how long time the product lives.
Of course. So using the product for a longer time obviously is
half or double it or whatever.
Right. And how do you feel? There's so many ways to tackle this, and I have so many questions. When did it all start for you? When did you start thinking about these questions for real as a designer?
The first time I remember was actually maybe like in 4th grade, having speech about recycling with a lot of old yogurt cartons and creme fraiche cartons, and telling my class how to put plastic in one container and wood in another and so on. So I guess around 10.
It's been with you your whole life.
Yeah. Right? Yeah, it does.
And starting out as a designer, was it easy to have this background, have this view of how to design, or has it evolved during your years?
I went to school in the middle of the 90s. Efficiency has always been good, I think, because it's something that costs for the producer. So if you use less material and use them wisely, I think maybe it has been harder during, like after the 2000, the millennium shift. After that, right after that, and then it starts changing again. Maybe after, I don't know exactly, but 2012 maybe it changed again. So in the 90s it was not that. Oh, but I was in school, so I don't really know.
All right. Do you think? I mean, obviously, this is a period when the industry has grown quite a lot.
Yeah.
And at the same time, obviously this question has become more and more important the last almost like a year or two.
Yeah.
In terms of changing the global or let's say the public opinion.
Yeah.
So do you think the companies are changing now? Are they in a better place in terms of talking about these issues or making progress?
It's different companies,
right.
Of course. But I just saw the World Economic Forum's risks report. Came out yesterday. And the first 5 risks are climate change. And that's like 200 of the most important biggest companies in the world. So I guess now it's on the main topic.
Right. So from if you look at the furniture industry, how do you think they're doing?
Good and bad. I think if you look at the Swedish production in Sweden, it's pretty good because it's easy to buy renewable energy for the production. It's pretty easy to work with wood, an FSC certificate. But then if we start talking about the target that we are supposed to lower our emission by 50% to 2030.
Right.
And Sweden has actually said 2045. The government has said that. So then is it much harder, and we need to work a lot more with recycled materials. I think that's the main issue. I read this other really good report that is called Exponential Roadmap. That's made by a lot of scientists, NGOs, the industries, and so on. And they did it to the UN summit in September. And they said for the industry is recycling the number one thing of materials.
Right.
Reuse the materials. We can earn a lot of emissions. and then choose low carbon material. It's also important. And how much you use. We use so much extra materials than we actually need. I think it was like 800 kilos per person per year. Materials do we use in steel, concrete, aluminum, and one more material.
That's not being. It doesn't end up on the product, or it's just
no. It's that ends up on products, but 800 kilo per year. Wow. It's like yeah.
Per person?
Yeah, per person in Europe.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So if we as a designer, I think that's where we can help.
Right.
You can design with less material. Then it's a big change. If it's half the material in the same product, it's like 50% less of the emission.
800 kilos.
Oh, that's not good.
That's not good. I think those are the type of sort of, tent-pole facts that we need to bring out there. It's almost the same with the fashion industry, and we talk a lot about that on this show as well. When you look at how much of the produced clothing that doesn't even end up, in the consumer's hands. It's
right.
It's about 70% or something like that. That's just, the overproduction is staggering, and obviously. I didn't know it was equally bad in the furniture industry. I'm trying to learn up on this, but obviously we don't buy a ton worth of furniture each person every year. It seems obvious.
No.
But as a designer, then it's all about being efficient with the material use in the products that you actually design. So it starts there in a way for you.
Yeah, both efficient and then to reassembly. I think that's like two main thing that is important.
And what do you mean by that?
So you can de-assembly the product when you go to the recycling station.
So you can separate the materials.
Yeah, but it also helps you to keep the when you use the material, it's easy to change. If you could see the different parts, you can buy a new part.
Right. You can prolong the life of the furniture. Right?
So that's so I think that's like two really good thing to do if you're a designer. And then of course you should choose the right material. Right. The right material on the right place. So if you need leather because textile don't tackle the using part, then maybe it's good to use it in a little, like a square or something.
And has this affected your aesthetic in any way, you think?
I don't know, but of course I'm rather taking seagrass seats on the chairs than leather. So, yes, I guess so.
Let's take some examples of projects you have done I think it helps people to understand how to tackle this issue. You were on the show actually a year ago when we had the podcast. By then it was pretty new, the project you did for Nationalmuseum.
Yes.
And you did the library, right?
Yeah, the old library.
The old library that you interior decorated and produced some new products for.
Yeah.
So give some examples of materials you used in that project.
It was a lot of wood, and then just as I said, seagrass and hemp, and tencel also, actually for the carpet.
Right.
And tencel is I don't know if you know, but it's like a fast-growing tree.
Yeah, it's being used a lot in
the fashion industry.
So more and more. Yeah. So how do you is it easy to find these materials?
No, I think that's one of the problems, that it's they are usually expensive and it's harder to find. And for us Scandinavians, the fast-growing grasses are from Vietnam, not from Asia. So it's harder to buy small small parts for small producers in Sweden.
Right, small amounts. So, and how do you balance that? Because I think, as the general public, you learn certain things about sustainability, and certain things are bad and certain things are good. So, like everything that's produced close to us is good, and everything that's produced halfway around the world is bad. But in the way I've understood it, when you actually look at the footprint, it could be kind of the other way around, or at least have that into consideration. We can use some material that's made in Vietnam, for instance, that is very healthier for the planet, and it then would be okay to transport it from there.
Yeah, production in Vietnam, if you're talking about bamboo, maybe they travel by bike to the factory, then they do it by hand, and then they travel by bike back from work, and then they do the product, and maybe they even take those on bikes for doing the finishing. And then they take it on boat over to Europe. But that's only 4%. But if you would live in Vietnam and buy a product like that, it could be almost have zero emission.
Have you been there?
Yes.
You've seen how they do it?
Yeah, I've actually been doing a product there in the factory.
Right.
Just to see how we could use more materials, and both why they throw away materials and how we could design it differently so you could see the bad or the ugly parts of the material. And that's usually a common for, I think, people working on factories, that by history they think some parts are good looking and some are bad looking, even if they have the same, they sustain the same time.
Right.
So it's as a designer you can do a pattern or something that would do that even the ugly parts look good.
So when you're talking about ugly parts, it's marks or
right?
or stuff like that. It comes up on the actual,
or where the branches gets out from wood, for example.
So you have to design a product that makes it okay to use those parts as well. So we don't.
Yeah, the natural look is okay.
Right. Yeah. And how? I mean, I think if I were a furniture company, I need to go out and learn and source these types of materials.
Yeah.
Do you think that's being done enough by furniture brands?
Hard question. Like if you see the Swedish companies, today it's a lot of different wood from different countries, but if you use a lot of Swedish wood, it's you can go out and see the production, of course.
Right.
Or for bigger companies that are global, they probably search a lot for that. I think for big company material, the end of material or peak end of materials is a big risk. That like oak is getting more expensive now because you can find less.
What do you mean by peak end material?
Oh, like peak oil, they are ending.
Right.
We don't have any more of it.
Okay.
If you're talking about wood, it probably takes 70 or 100 years for a tree to be fully grown to be plank, or you call it, so you can make furniture of it.
Wow.
So, and that's, if you say renewable material, it's supposed to be materials that are done by our planet or grown under 70 years. Otherwise, it's not renewable.
So it have to be regrown in under 70.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then you also, in my mind, then you have to use the furniture in 70 years. Then if you have something like that took 70 years to grow.
So if you buy a 100-year-old oak table, that would be okay.
Yeah. yes.
I guess everything that's
if
you
they
buy secondhand is
and hopefully they planted new oak.
All right.
But the good thing with the furniture is that the carbon is in still in the furniture.
Mm.
So you don't release the carbon when you make a furniture.
Oh, that's true. That's true. And you also use it longer. So, I mean, I think we talk about this question a lot from the fashion industry, and it has other types of challenges, especially in terms of how little we actually use the products that we do buy, which is about, I think, 3 times or something per each garment. So hopefully a piece of furniture which takes more material to produce, but you use it for longer.
Yeah.
So talk to me about where we stand right now. I mean, it's obvious for anyone who's following you on social media, etc., that you've been in demonstrations the last year. Yeah. You talk about this issue. Obviously, we have Greta Thunberg and the global movement that she has spurred from her work. I'd like to start with from your perspective, your personal perspective. What has this meant for you?
I think it's amazing that so many people have joined. But I also think it's we cannot do this ourselves or us individuals change the climate. We need to have help of the governments and politicians. And in Sweden, you can only vote every 4th year. And the politicians need opinions to change their way of making choices. So I think that's one good way of making an opinion when you don't have a year for election.
Right. And just being part of these demonstrations, being part of this movement, has it inspired you in any way?
Yeah, I think so. And also a responsibility for the generation after us that is 10 years younger that will see a lot more of this and that we are changing so rapidly and not really thinking about it.
What do you think is the most important things to do as a consumer, as a private citizen? What are the things? What are the steps you can take to help this progress in a more positive direction?
Talk about it. I would do count your carbons. I think the best site is Klimatkontot, but it's in English also. Right. And after that, stop using fossil fuels or minimize it as much as possible. And for Swedes, it's probably flying and eating red meat.
Flying and eating red meat. On that note, last year you traveled to Milan by train.
Yeah.
And we talked about this a year ago, and that was sort of I think when you mentioned that to people, actually I think it has shifted a lot since then, but just when you mentioned that to me, it was like, what are you talking about? That must take a week or something. Is it even possible? Where do you change trains? How do you sleep? Like, what was that experience like for you?
It was really good. Actually, pretty fast is it changing your mindset totally, and I'm almost thinking nowadays I cannot afford the time flying because it's a lot of dead time. You're going, it's short stops and you have to stand in line a lot and do a lot of boring things. When you go to the train station, you need to be there like 5 minutes before, and you jump on the train and you have like 5 hours to work, and then you have to switch train.
So it's quality time.
It's much more quality time. And it actually doesn't take a week to Milan. It takes 1 day, 24 hours.
Let's make that clear. Let's
and you sleep on a sleeping train for like maybe 10 hours or something.
Right.
Yeah.
So where do you switch trains? Do you in Copenhagen?
In Copenhagen and Hamburg,
Right.
and then in Basel.
And I suppose I assume you're doing the same thing this year, or if
Yes.
you're going, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm.
And are there more people following? You think?
At least 2 journalists.
2 journalists this year. So now you travel. Last year you traveled with 1.
Yes.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. I also saw. I just came back from PT Uomo in Florence, and Christopher Lundman, the creative director of Tiger of Sweden, he used but he took a week and made several stops down to Florence from Stockholm.
Oh, okay.
The week before, and went to museums and all. If you followed his Instagram, it was like a journey through Europe, leading up to the fair in Florence. Yeah. So that was amazing. But I think to me, making the shift towards traveling more by train.
Yeah.
And I have a colleague that works in Umeå in the north of Sweden, and he stopped flying almost completely. He just only takes the train from Umeå down to Stockholm. He comes here every 2 weeks to work with us. He says basically the same thing. Yeah. The first revelation was the amount of quality time that you actually got from even and Umeå is like a 50-minute flight.
Yeah.
So you would think that that's just the quickest way, but if you count in all the transportation and transfers and everything, it's probably 3.5 hours.
Yeah.
And I think the train is 5.5.
And it's probably 3.5 hours when you not can work, maybe a half hour.
Yeah, exactly.
In the middle of the plane.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's it's interesting how, because I think sometimes we're locked into certain ideas about things, and we're so for the past few decades we've been so focused on efficiency and progress and technological progress and so forth, and that we're just sort of jumping on every new thing that comes to us. And we rarely take a step back and compare and think about, is this actually better than the
other alternative
or like a previous alternative? Because I think that's one of the major shifts is to see the quote unquote old way of doing it as an actual alternative still.
Yeah.
So it was interesting to hear your experience as well. That it was about quality time. But what do you think? What do you think about this? Do you think we'll keep this drop? Because I think that we saw like a 5% drop in airline travel last year in Sweden. And that's sort of the Greta Thunberg effect that we like to say in the media. Do you think this is going to sustain, or are you worried that it is sort of a kind of like a trend right now to care about these things, and then we'll go back to old habits?
I hope for the human race that it's not a trend.
Right.
Because as a lot of people, scientists say that it's an emergency, and we have already 1.1 higher temperature. So, and we have already 2020 seen a lot of bushfires, and we will see a lot of more extreme weathers. And after that, will all these, what you call tipping points, the Earth tipping systems, will tip over. Some has already started, and after that, we can't stop. So,
what does that mean? Tipping? What defines a tipping point?
It's the Earth system, and so it's like if the glaciers start melting, the Gulf Stream with maybe change direction, or it's how the Earth system goes together.
You can't go back from that. It's a definite change.
Yeah, actually, it's we haven't had temperature over 2+ in the latest 3 million years. So the planet doesn't know that. So the scientists don't know what happens if it goes over 2. So it might be that we go to this hot house Earth scenario when the temperatures go up very much, and the sea level, and we cannot live here anymore.
When you take when taking the scientific route about this problem or this issue, Where is a good way to start, do you think? Where do you start in terms of doing your research?
Stockholm Resilience Center.
Stockholm Resilience Center.
Yeah, that's the best place. And they have a lot of scientists connected to them that actually have done a lot of the reports that IPCC collect when they do their reports.
What's IPCC?
It's the UN climate group. It stands for now I don't know what it's.
We can look it up.
The shorten, yeah.
and from a personal perspective, how often do you read up on it? How do you sort of cover this subject in your daily life or in your work?
Actually, I took this course this fall that is called Valence Echo at Stockholm Resilience Center. That's a really good course if you want to. It's in the evenings every Tuesday, one fall. And then it's with a lot of good scientists like Johan Rockström and Will Steffen and Carl Folke.
You get to meet those guys in the course?
Yeah. So it's a very good course and very good lectures. And they talk a lot about how it is now. And they have done a lot of research in the area. And then it's much easier to connect your what you have learned together, so you can understand it all together.
So it's current data.
Yes, it's very current data. Yeah, it's the data that is that the UN or IPCC follow.
Yeah, that's fascinating to me. You grew up on a farm.
Yes, that's true.
Does this matter at all to you, to your view on this subject? If you grew up closer to nature than in the city?
I wouldn't think so. But after listen and gone through a few of these eco courses, I first experienced that the outdoor industry is much better with eco clothing and so on. And in that field, a lot of people say that maybe it has to do with that the customers are out in nature. And on this latest course, Carl Folke, the scientist, says that we have to connect to the biosphere and to nature to understand the climate change. And maybe because I am grew up in the nature, in the middle of the nature, it was more close to me. I don't know, but maybe it's that way.
But spending time in nature would actually be good for your sense of the subject in a way.
Yes.
That's what they're saying.
Yeah. So spend an hour a week in nature.
Be grateful for what we have, right?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
And maybe you can understand like what you talk about, the earth system and like the way nature is changing over the year and so on. You have easier understanding.
What do you say to people who, as I think there are still deniers out there, and
yes,
the people who shy away from the subject and don't want to talk about it and say, we had warm winters 20 years ago as well, and so forth. What do you say to them when you? Because I'm sure you meet them all the time.
Yeah, it's very hard. It's very hard with the thing that it's so good that you do that work, but I have to be honest. I love flying. What do you answer to that? And the harsh way is I have this illustration that is really good on the globe, and it's divided in two. And it's on one, it's like a nice word with a lot of nice of nature, and it says eco. And the other one is a lot of industries and black, and it says ego. And I think all this climate change is a social thing too, that we care about the people living in much worse areas like Asia or closer to where they will get a lot of more extreme weathers. But we will get it too. But it's probably the poor people that will get a lot of the extreme weathers first.
Right. And because I mean, it's such an interesting topic to talk about because it's about our culture also.
Yes.
It goes so deep and it's so ingrained in us to be afraid of change, in a way. And there are evolutionary explanations to this. So it's sort of you can't even almost like you can't even blame people because we are evolved.
Don't like that.
We were evolved into be afraid of anything that changes or threatens our way of life in a way. So I'm curious, is there a way to help? That's what I want to do with this podcast, is help people find out information and be scientific about it. But in that situation, when people are like, "Oh, I love meat, so I'm never gonna stop eating meat," or "That's not true," or giving these generalized sort of opinions about it on a subject which
that
is
not
actually
true.
Scientifically proven. Do you have other tricks to help them be more enlightened, or?
I have two answers. First on the meat, then you go for the Eat Lancet report. And then I think that I tackle that all the time, and I think it's really hard. But one thing is probably or maybe two things. Both you can talk about how the good thing that comes out of it. And I'm still trying to find out all the good part that would come with this. And I guess that's what we kind of have to do a commercial about.
Right.
And about the science, it's for me, I see it's usually good to have a lot of science, and then you can refer to different type of things all the time, and measurements and so on that that really could show, and also things that our government has decided that a lot of people don't know, like that we are net zero by 2045. Or like the Green New Deal that Ursula von der Leyen has talked about. Yeah. She has said in her first 100 days she's going to make a lot of changes, like climate taxes, and when you have like a climate border CO2 border emission tax.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have to pay if we import stuff to Europe. Yeah, you have to pay like an extra tax for the environmental cost if it comes from a country that have not paid CO2 emission taxes. And it is a lot of taxes on production by coal instead of solar or wind power.
So one point you made there is about decisions that we've already made, or as a country has already made. So we need to enforce those decisions.
Yeah, and we have to follow that. Yeah. And also I think it's, if you talk about investments and you don't want to lose your money, it's much better to put your money on that part than the other.
Right. I think from a sort of incentive perspective, I think that's where we need to find the strongest arguments in a way, because obviously we have this market economy that we need to incentivize companies to work in this direction, and the incentive cannot only be do good, because there are other sort of economic factors and realistic factors that you have to take in account.
And not only goodwill.
No. exactly.
So it has to be, you call it subsidies and taxes has to be. So it's, you earn money on doing good and you lose money on doing the wrong thing.
Right. But another thing there is the consumer. So if the demand for a more responsible brand or a brand that takes responsibility is higher, then obviously it makes economic sense to go for this, right?
Yeah.
How do you see the consumer in all this? Because you are working in a market that is about it's about design, it's about identity, it's about consumption as a way of showing the world who you are, in a sense. Do you think the consumer is changing also, or changing fast enough?
I think the consumer is changing, but not fast enough. Probably not, and there where I think you need taxes, so we can compete on same levels. Like small Swedish company can compete on the same as bigger companies that import a lot without carbon taxes. Then we also, and I think that would also lead to a innovative technique that we, for example, like Philippa K, I don't know if you know that they made this sweater in wool, Swedish wool, and that's like those types of new findings or new way of doing it. It's really hard to do if you compete with different rules. Right. So then I think we need some type of new economic rules with taxes or similar stuff to make that a more evil game.
Yeah, but when you talk about legislation, it also, in a way, it's not enough that we do it in Sweden. We have to, because the problem is global.
Yes, and the economy is global.
Even if one country is perfect and has the perfect setup system, has the right amount of consumers and all that, it doesn't matter, because on the other side of the Östersjön, there's another country doing something completely different and pollutes our air and so forth. What are some of the steps you think need to be taken here? Is it the EU? Is it how do we go about it from a global perspective?
I think EU is the one we have to start believing in even more, because what we saw at the last UN summit in Madrid is really hard to. It seems hard to
implement it.
Yeah, and that everyone wants to sign the same agreement, and it will take too long time. So I hope a lot on Ursula and new tax systems for, and actually I really believe in that, and in stuff coming into EU.
So in a way, I think from this perspective, I think globalism is more important than ever, in a sense.
Yes.
That we have to
and trust.
I listened to a live talk with Yuval Harari that wrote the Sapiens book, and in front of this audience that was sort of taken aback by this claim, he said that nationalism is a great thing. And the interviewer, what do you mean nationalism is a great thing? Well, it's actually, if from an evolutionary perspective, is very what's the word here? We are not evolved to be in a larger group than about 150 people or something, like from when we were hunter and gatherers. Yeah. So the fact that we can agree on a nation state and believe in a nation state is actually a great development from what we used to be.
Yeah.
So the next step would be to view ourselves as a global humanity and take steps from there. So in a way, it's counterintuitive, because we see countries closing, and we have Brexit and Trump and all these things where you focus on the your own country in a way. Yeah. I think that's the sort of counterintuitive part. That's nationalism when you think about it, but in a way, it's about trusting us as a group. I thought that was very sort of thought-provoking in a way. That we're not sort of created to take responsibility for the whole planet. I think maybe that's obvious.
But nation could also be like interest.
Right.
So people with the same interest or something.
Could be a unified voice. I think that's what we've seen with the demonstrations all over the Fridays for Future demonstrations. It's that people can unite behind one cause.
Yeah.
In a way. What do you say to those who criticize Greta for not having the answers?
She's 16 years old. My son is 15. He wouldn't answer any of those questions. He has no clue. Oh. So I think she is amazing, knowing so much. And then very good that she doesn't take a politic stand and that she always says, listen to the science. And I think they are so good. I was listening at Johan Rockström's podcast, and no politician, when Greta and a few of the other Fridays for Future activists called to where he worked, the Potsdam Institute for Climate Change, and asked, can we come and listen, and could you explain a lot of things to us? At that point, when she did that, no politic person have called and asked for help. But afterwards, a few did.
That's a dramatic change, obviously.
And that the kids want to know more from the science than the politician. That's interesting. And I hope it changes.
What do you say to your fellow designers that are not doing enough? The furniture fair is coming up here. You're going to meet a lot of colleagues.
An easy step is to use half the materials and then recycled material, I would say.
What are you looking forward to the most right now?
The upcoming year, and of course see the changes and then the furniture fair. And even if I'm not always optimistic about how it goes with the climate change, I'm also very curious to know, like a lot of people are talking about all the stores closing, like 25% in the cities. What is going to be there instead? And what is this new fossil-free era looking like?
Right.
Yeah, that's like that illustration. What does it looks like? That's I'm very curious about that.
What do you think? You're a designer. You have to be part in creating this.
Like in the cities, I hope we will have a lot of less cars and a lot of self-driving cars, and then we can do a lot of other stuff, like have parks and so on. And then if we rethink our life, like or change our mindset, that like when you take the train, maybe the life is not so hectic. And actually, if we shop less, we need less money. So maybe we can start working 4 days a week.
Have a better quality of life.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, that's a nice, also a nice way to think about it, because sometimes it becomes about the do's and don'ts in certain very narrow fields. And I think we also have to start talking about it from a much wider perspective. How do we want to live our lives, and in what environment do we want to live them?
Yeah, and if you see on those, like a lot of BNP, if you look on the BNP that goes up, it's not always that well-being goes up. it stops somewhere, and then it's no more well-being.
Right.
So maybe if we change, way of shopping and way of using our money.
How do you view technology as a part of helping us move this question forward?
I think it's very important, but I don't think it will be the first main thing during our first 10 years of change.
Okay.
Then I think we have to take, like what they say in the eco business, the low-hanging fruits first.
Right.
Like having the material and so on. But after that, we have the new techniques has to come in to lower it more, 50% more.
I had a technologist called Magnus Askan on the show a few weeks ago, and he told me that if we would transfer to a scenario where we had self-driving cars in Stockholm, 94% of the cars would disappear. Because like all the cars
are standing still.
They're standing still. They're just sitting there in parking lots and the side of the roads and so forth.
Yeah.
We don't really need that. So that would be just as a thought experiment. I think that's interesting to look at. What would our cities look like if we had 94% less cars on the roads
and much better air?
Much better air.
And the sound.
Much better air, much better sound, much more space to work with, to put eco-friendly furniture in.
Trees at least.
Trees at least. Maybe start there. Emma, thank you so much for speaking to me.
Thank
I think
you so
it's going
much.
to be super interesting to see this coming years, and a lot of people think that the 20s are a defining decade for this issue, and we have a window here to change things.
Yeah.
So let's do this again sometime and see where we stand in this issue.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This has been The Innovators, an interview show from Scandinavian Man with me, Conrad Olsson. We'll be back soon with more conversations on design, culture, fashion, technology, and sustainability. For more news and interviews from the Scandinavian fashion and culture scene, visit scandinavianman.com. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.